Okay, he was effing huge. Peachy pulled down those boxers, and her gas spurred the beast in Minjo on even more. Peachy was filled with a fear and an admiration of the fleshy beast pointing up at her, with droplets of pre-cum oozing from the yawning tip. She felt her own parts stir in shock. Her nipples stood erect, and her pink panties became wet from her juices. Peachy took a deep breath, and slowly, sexily, slithered her legs downward until she was kneeling in front of him, between his legs. Minjo was looking down at her, and his heart was beating fast. This was it. His fantasies were taking shape. Peachy moved her gaze down from Minjo's eyes to his crotch, and with one petite hand she reached over and grabbed roughly onto the middle part of the warm pole. Her hand didn't even fit around the massive unit. Fear turned into a sort of curiosity of how he would react to different things, and she wrapped both hands around it and pulled up and down like how those internet articles she had read prior to his visit said to do so. Minjo leaned back and savored the feeling of her hands exploring his length, cupping the balls, pulling the foreskin up over the bell, rubbing his steady gushes of pre-cum over the shaft. His thoughts drifted to Peachy's vajayjay. He imagined it opening up and revealing a carnal tunnel of love. He thought of licking the lips and the little pea-shaped knob at the top. Imagined her body shivering with pleasure, the sweat shining lightly on her forehead, dampening the dark brown hair. After rubbing the shaft for a few minutes, Peachy was ready to go to the next step. She grabbed his length and lowered the swollen head to her mouth. Minjo looked down at her, and they maintained eye contact as she pushed the head tightly past her lips and into her mouth. Her vajayjay tightened and leaked cum at the feeling of his meat pressing against all sides of her mouth, and the salty flavor of the pre-cum dribbling down her throat made her groan with lust. But this time, her cum had leaked down to her jeans, and her vajayjay was wetter than it had ever been. To her, this was almost as pleasurable as vaginal sex would be. The feeling of receiving an act so submissive made Minjo's ego swell. He had a feeling that it was turning Peachy on, too, being dominated by such a symbol of sex. Her groans were too real and feral in nature to exist superficially. Well, thought Minjo, a smile forming, if she likes the feeling of being dominated, why not add on to it? He grabbed the back of Peachy's head, being slightly rough, but not to the point of pain, and he pushed her head further over his throbbing meat. Peachy was surprised that Minjo was taking such a bold step, but nevertheless, the feeling of being put to shame by Minjo's sex was incredible, and she willed her lips over the girthy shaft, her eyes focusing onto the small bush of pubic hair in front of her. She suppressed her gag reflex, and before she knew it, he was all the way inside, pressing against the back of her throat and depositing copious amounts of pre-cum. Minjo gasped at the feeling, and the mere vision of Peachy's nose buried in his bush almost made him come right there. This was excellent foreplay, but ending it by coming right now would have been a terrible decision. He may have been playing manly man, but he knew that Peachy had needs too, and a submissive lover always feels good on both sides. He pulled out of her mouth slowly, a final spurt of pre-cum streaking her lips as her big, glowing eyes looked into his. Peachy's gaze was so strong and forceful, the epitome of lust inhibited those brown orbs. Minjo felt as if she could rape him with only her sex-filled stare. In hot and heavy silence, Minjo pulled Peachy onto the couch and pressed his hand against the moist jeans, lightly massaging the warm spot with his index finger. Minjo kissed his way down Peachy's lean, fit abdomen, running his tongue slowly down the light crease of ab muscle leading to her belly button. He pulled off her jeans, revealing sexy, long legs. There was still a pair of panties, pink and soaked in her cum. She slipped them off, and left Minjo facing her perfect vajayjay, streaks of cum leaking down her leg from a tight crease of plump flesh. He crouched on the couch with her legs resting on either side of him, one up on the head of the sofa and one on the ground, creating a wide area to crouch down on the couch and explore Peachy's moist cavity. Her vajayjay was really quite smaller than he expected. Minjo teased the swollen lips with his tongue, brushing lightly against the little knob of flesh at the top of her privates. The privates, the most sensitive part. Peachy shivered as a pulse of pleasure coursed through her body. The feeling of Minjo's tongue on her tight passage. It was too much. Minjo continued teasing the lips of the vajayjay until he tasted her cum. It was sweet and warm, which is how cum tastes when one eats an excess of fruit.